Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Before we start off tonight's story, I'd just like to say a quick shout out and my best wishes for a subscriber and friend from way back, Mr. Mark Cook. Hey Mark, hope you're feeling better. Unfortunately guys, Mark had a heart attack about 3 days ago, so he's stuck in hospital recovering from that, but he's made as tough as old boots, and hopefully we'll see him on the mend soon. Without further ado though guys, I've got a great story for you here. I think you should enjoy this one. Please do let me know what you think is up with this story, what type of creature we're dealing with. Yeah, and of course please do like and share. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled There's Something in the Woods on Mount Nestor. Let's get straight into that. I was supposed to be getting married. My lifelong best friend and best man Nathan wanted to do something together before the wedding. Like back in the good old days, one last big hurrah. He called it. Nathan was already married, but his wife and my fiancée didn't get along well as we would have hoped. We didn't get to see each other as much as we used to, so we were both pretty excited when we got the okay to go camping. The leaves were rustling that morning and the sun was shining through the treetops. Clean mountain air filled my lungs. It felt great. It really was like the good old days. The plan was to bike around from the north side of Mount Nestor onto the south side. After that, we would head up the mountain a few kilometers to our campsite. We had been riding along the dirt paths for close to 2 hours when the trees started to thin out. I saw Nathan stop up ahead of me. As I rode up to him, the trees came to a stop, like someone had drawn a line in the woods. Past the tree line and in front of Nathan was a cliff. It dropped off at least 100 feet. At the east side of the drop was a thin, bumpy path less than 3 feet wide. It was riddled with rocks, and on one side of the path a large wall of mountain stretched up well overhead. On the other side was the 100-foot drop. Nathan hopped off his bike with no hesitation and casually began walking along the cliffside. After he had crossed, I walked my way out onto the path and glanced over the edge of the cliff. My stomach turned upside down. I stumbled back hard into the wall of the mountain and took some deep breaths. I've never been great with heights. Stepping away from the wall, I gripped my handlebars tight and slowly walked my bike along the path. My eyes were glued to the ground under my feet. The path wasn't as narrow as it seemed at first, but it was riddled with rocks and loose dirt. Thankfully, it wasn't very long. When I was about halfway across, I noticed something. On the side of the mountain, inside of a large carved circle, there were 2 carvings of arrows. They were facing each other with a small dot resting in between. The edges of the carving were rounded and worn. It looked old. I distinctly remember wondering why someone would carve anything into the side of the mountain. Looking back, I have a pretty good idea why they did. I made my way across the second half of the path without incident. The atmosphere immediately felt different on the other side. There were no animals or birds flying overhead. The wind wasn't rustling through the trees either, and the air felt old. It was stale. But Nathan had been here before, and I just wanted to camp and ride like we'd planned. So I pushed on, ignoring the sinking feeling in my gut. We made it to the top of the trails and had set up our tents just after noon. After chowing down a couple of protein bars each, we decided it was time to ride. I felt on top of the world, blazing down the dirt and launching off jumps that took me back. I felt carefree, like nothing else mattered or existed, just us and the mountain. Nathan was right. The trails were amazing. The paths were free of debris, but hardly touched. and after a few trials, Nathan stopped in front of me. The path before him narrowed and became wrapped closely in dense trees. I stopped beside him. Nathan warned me the next trail was pretty intense and laughed as he told me to just try and keep up. He pedalled through the narrow entry and I quickly lost sight of him as he turned around a bend. I took a bit of a breather and drank some water. The woods were silent. We were definitely the only people on those trails. Eventually, I was speeding down the path. The only sign of Nathan was in front of me with some loose dirt and a set of tyre treads. He was right, the trail was difficult. It was very steep and had extremely tight corners. The one saving grace was that the jumps were only on one half of the path, while the other remained flat. The flat side was difficult enough, so I avoided the ramps whenever possible. It was obvious from the tracks in dirt, Nathan had hit every one he could. The wind was pulling my sweat off my face as I whipped down the path. Another ramp was coming up on the left and I steered right to avoid it. However, if I'd hit the jump, I wouldn't have ridden over a bunch of glass from a broken beer bottle. It eventually made me feel slightly better knowing other people did come up here, but that comfort fell away when I heard air rushing out from the front tyre. Before I had even reached the next corner, I had to stop. My front tyre was completely deflated, and Nathan's backpack had the tyre patches in it. I sprayed water into my mouth from a bottle before getting off the bike and walking in shame down the path. I had been walking for about 30 minutes and still hadn't come to the end of the path. It would be a hell of a trip back. The adrenaline I had from riding was completely drained from my system and I was tired, to say the least. My body felt heavy and there was a strange smell in the air. It almost smelled like a dead animal, but like the smell was older than that. It smelled like blood that was tinged with decay. That's when I realised the woods were way too quiet. My heart was beating like a drum and my breath heaved in and out of my lungs. Every step on the dirt under my feet felt like it echoed across the entire mountain. Every step, breath, or move I made was too loud. I felt really uneasy. I was being watched. I was sure of it then, and even more sure of it looking back. I put a foot up onto one of the pedals of my bike and pulled myself up, trying to get a better view. I craned my head in all directions, but I could only see trees. Then the world started to feel normal again. The smell started to fade as quick as it had come. I became convinced I had caught a waft of air that carried the smell of a dead animal. I also decided I wasn't being watched. I'd probably just had a panic attack from being a bit too freaked out. Still, the idea of an animal lying dead not too far off wasn't thrilling. I climbed onto my bike and rode as gently as I could with the flat. I found Nathan sitting casually on a log a few corners down the path. He gave me a bit of a shit for being slow and for getting the flat tyre in the first place. I told him I thought of something strange was going on and that I'd smelled something. He listened, but didn't think anything that strange had happened. I can't blame him for not believing me. I didn't even believe me. Weird smells weren't exactly out of place in the woods, and it's not like I actually saw anything. I felt a bit better after telling Nathan about what happened. We applied the tyre patch and inflated the tyre with a hand pump. After a bit more riding, nothing else strange happened, so we decided to head back to camp for the night. We had just finished roasting hot dogs over the fire when everything started to get quiet again. Even the fire seemed to crackle and pop less. Nathan and I shared an uneasy glance. I reminded him through whispers of what I experienced earlier, and I could see he was starting to get nervous. That's when the smell started to fall over our camp. The air quickly became thick with the smell of blood and things that died long ago. It was so strong, it had me dry heaving, and pretty soon the hot dogs I had for dinner came back out of me. I pulled the bottom of my shirt up over my nose and held it there firmly. That's when we started to hear bushes moving. It was quiet at first, a hush rustling in the distance. Slowly, it grew louder and nearer to our campsite. Nathan and I grabbed some of the tools we had brought with us and stood, waiting for whatever was creeping towards us. A large bush just past the edge of our camp shook, and I gripped the screwdriver tight in my hand. Everything was silent again. The smell slowly started to fade away, and the noise of the forest reappeared just as quickly as it had left. We had just made up our minds quickly after the sound returned. There was no way we were staying the night there. We agreed to pack up as much as we could, but if anything strange happened, we'd leave it right away. We managed to pack the essentials and were beginning to deconstruct the tent when the forest started to go quiet once more. It only took a nod from each of us. We threw our packs on, sat on our bikes, and left our tent behind. I had never ridden so fast in my life. The trees around us were a blur, and shortly after starting down the path, we seemed to ride out of whatever made the world go silent. The sound of our bike chains whirring filled the air. A cloud of dirt trailed behind us as we flew down the mountain. I was in front this time, thank God. Nathan said he didn't want to accidentally leave me behind like he had earlier. I was extremely grateful he felt that way. We came up to a particularly winding part of the path, and as we rushed around the corners, that awful silence started to dilute the world around us again. I did a quick glance back. Nathan was still behind me. Then the smell of blood creeped up my nose. It got worse and worse with every twist and bend of the path. The sick smell filled the forest. The smell had made the air so thick it felt like I was breathing in liquid. The next turn had a thick cluster of trees on the left that was blocking my view of the path on the other side. Through the small gaps between the trees, I caught a glimpse of something on the path ahead of us, a black mass between the grey wood. I tried to stop before even rounding the corner, but I braked too hard and I fell on my back, sliding into the grass just off the path. I laid in the grass for only a second. The warmth of dread filled me. I couldn't swallow. My blood was boiling. A horrible mass was blocking the path. It was covered in black hair. Not fur, hair. Strands of grey were seeded amongst the long black hair that draped from its body. Underneath the hair was a dark greyish brown skin. Bald patches were spread across its limbs and joints, and the bare skin boiled out sick, clear ooze. The top of its head, two curled horns stretched menacingly from behind its ears. I thought I was staring at the devil. My eyes had swelled with tears. It was facing away from me on the path. A deer was torn to pieces in front of it. Blood and hooved limbs played, strewn across the path. The thing pushed its claws into the partially devoured carcass. Handfuls of blood and meat were shoved into its mouth. A horribly raspy growl escaped its snout as it ate. I scrambled onto my feet, pulling my bike up with me. Then it stood. The creature raised on its hind legs. It was easily 7 feet tall, but it felt taller. Its presence dwarfed the trees around the path. Its body shook as it stood there, back towards me. Its body heaved and jarred. It looked like it was about to throw up. Just then, Nathan rounded the corner and came to a stop. As he did, I turned around and stepped back onto the pedals. I put all my weight into pedaling back up the trail. Just after I got round the corner, Nathan let out the worst cry I've ever heard a man make. The sound of my friend's screams were quickly cut off. Bones breaking and flesh being ripped apart echoed throughout the woods. I made my way back up the path, a blubbering, weeping mess. I had found a different path down the mountain. I was determined to make it out of there alive. Tears swelled in my eyes. The air flowing around me pulled the tears across my face. The awful smell and lack of sound had faded, but I couldn't pinpoint when. The sun was setting quickly. Just the idea of being out here in the dark with that thing weighed heavy on my mind. I rode out narrowly lined paths we hadn't been on that day and found myself on a flat stretch of dirt that I did recognise. I couldn't have been riding more than 10 other minutes when the smell forced itself into my nostrils for what would be the last time that day. As I rode further down the path, the smell got stronger and stronger. Soon after that, I started to see something black in the trees behind me. I pedalled harder than I ever knew possible. I could see the tall wall of mountain not even 150 yards in front of me. The air was becoming thick as liquid again. I pedalled faster. My heart sunk into my stomach. I was losing control. The pedals were moving too fast, and the handlebars began to sway. I had completely lost control. My arm suddenly turned into a knot as the handlebars quickly jerked 180 degrees, throwing me from my bike. I hit the ground hard. My arms were scraped and bleeding, and I could hear it. I could hear it moving towards me. I crawled out of the tree line and onto the path that lay below the mountain wall, and beside the cliff. I was muttering to myself. I just had to keep crawling. Small tremors ran through the ground as I could hear the footsteps behind me. Just keep crawling. It was all I could do. I felt hot breath fall over my feet and legs. I was going to die, but I kept muttering, just keep crawling. Just keep crawling. The words fell out of the mouth in between deep breaths. I could feel the beast about to throw itself on top of me when it let out a cry like something had torn it in two. I turned over onto my back and shuffled along the path, digging my heels into the path. I got one last glimpse of it as it climbed into the trees at the other side of the path. I stopped crawling. I was confused and out of breath. I looked up at the wall and saw the symbol from earlier carved into the stone, just feet behind me. Wow, hope you guys enjoyed that story. Please do let me know down below, of course, what type of creature you think we're dealing with there. Please do like and share. And of course, guys, remember, if you're going camping and you're thinking of spending an evening, remember, be safe, not sorry.